Hi, I'm Michael Abraham, creator of the Educator Training Program, Engaging Muslim Students in Public Schools, and author of the book by the same name. Links to both are in the description box below. This video is going to be an extended summary of the training for those who are interested in taking it. If you're watching this, you've probably explored some other material that I have out there, and maybe even seen testimonials of others who've already taken the training. Those testimonials give you an idea and an indication of how unique and effective this training program is, and just how much it hits the spot for educators who are seeking to take their engagement and their relationship building with students and families to the next level, which everyone's looking to do right now. It's very common for educators who take this training to come out of it saying that it's something that should be required for any educator who serves Muslim students and families, even if they have only a small amount. This is just one thing that is said amongst the many other benefits that my trainees cite, and you can explore more of those through the link to the testimonials that are in the description box. Those testimonials, they show people that engaging Muslim students in public schools is not your typical run-of-the-mill educator training or your typical training on understanding basics of student culture and background. Engaging Muslim students in public schools is a comprehensive training. It is a training of depth. It's a solution-oriented training. It gives educators knowledge, skills, strategies, and insights that they need in order to nurture and educate and partake in raising Muslim students in a way that truly puts them on a path towards self-actualization. It is sometimes hard for us to say, but for many different reasons, the reality is that self-actualization is something that is very difficult for us Muslims living in America and living in the Western world to achieve. For Muslims, knowing this and the struggle that our communities endure with this, it can and does especially manifest itself in the form of anxiety over the development of the youth in our community. That in turn expresses itself often as anxiety in Muslim communities and feelings of consternation and skepticism over the influence of the public school institutions on Muslim children. Engaging Muslim students in public schools is a comprehensive program that gives educators what they need for us to begin reconciling the issues that exist within this phenomenon. And in fact, it not only begins the process of reconciliation and building stronger bonds and authentic bonds with our families and students, but it then actually shows us the way to begin using the cultural background that our Muslim students bring into the classroom as the great resource that it is to complement and facilitate the goals that we have for students in public education. There's 6 parts to engaging Muslim students in public schools. Part 1 is on the research in the field of education that justifies the need for this training. The need for this training is recognized, and it's actually been called for a very long time by those who've examined the experiences of Muslim students in academia. Muslim students are often put into boxes or understood in education and public education institutes through frameworks offered to educators through equity movements and multiculturalist frameworks that have been done in education. And these have some benefit, and they can serve purposes for understanding our Muslim students better, but they very often miss the mark with certain things that educators need to understand. A main issue with this is that those frameworks of understanding, they often neglect the role and intentional examination of religion in people's lives. And any researcher who examines Muslim people or Muslim students in public schools will tell you and does tell people that you cannot comprehensively understand Muslim people without an examination of religion and understanding how it interplays in the lives of Muslim people. And what I show in this part of the training is specific ways in which these well-intentioned movements within education do some service for Muslim students, but they often frequently miss the mark, and they can actually cause and do cause educators to fall into pitfalls and mistakes in trying to engage Muslim students in a culturally relevant way when those educators have not specifically examined Muslim students and families as Muslims. And when educators do get some exposure to trainings that do specifically talk about Islam or examine Muslim people as Muslims, oftentimes those trainings, they fail to relate the teachings and curate the context specifically for the experience of being in a public school and being an instructor in public schools. Part 2 of the training gives educators a concise and focused overview and history of Muslims in America and the developments of Muslim communities within America. The Muslim American population is very diverse, and understanding how these communities have come into being, what it does is it gives educators the background knowledge that they need to help guide students in identifying themselves across historical, economic, and geographic timelines. And this is something that is very important for identity development in young people, and something that our diverse students often miss out on is we teach history and we teach about the world through certain narratives in school, but they don't get to have their own place in those narratives. There has been a lot of intentional work done to make the narratives that are brought into public education more diverse over the past few decades, as the demographics of student populations in general has diversified in the United States. But it is more often than not, almost always the case, that educators and public school institutes, they're lacking in the background knowledge themselves to really understand how Muslim communities have come into being in the United States, and to be able to relate that to students when they're teaching about academic content. Also, likewise, most educators have the experience, educators who teach Muslim students, that they grew up in America at a time where they were probably not, it depends where they grew up, but they were probably not that familiar with Muslim communities themselves. But now they find themselves teaching classrooms full of Muslim students, and they find themselves in service to Muslim families. So there's clearly been a change that's gone on through their lifetime that they've seen, but they don't have a comprehensive understanding themselves of how that has come into being. And this comprehensive understanding is needed also to understand the diversity that is seen amongst Muslim students, be it racial diversity, socioeconomic diversity, ethnic origins diversity, or diversity related to citizen and immigration status, because there are different implications and phenomenon that take place with all these things, depending on where the students and families come from and where they fit into in the mosaic of Muslim communities in America. And what this part also does is help educators understand some basic and fundamental phenomenon that takes place with intergenerational dynamics within Muslim communities, which is a very important thing to understand. Part 3 of the training gets into Islamic beliefs and connecting them to students and families, and specifically connecting them to how religious beliefs operate in the everyday lives of our students and families and the real-world context of our public education institutes. Western media and Western politics have essentially corrupted the ability of the average American to authentically learn about Islam in this way where they understand how it interplays in the everyday lives of their Muslim neighbors and students and parents and whoever's in their community. So in part 3 of this training, it's a very extended part, you get a walkthrough of how Islam works and the foundational beliefs of Islam and the beliefs of it that are essentially universal to all Muslims. And with each step in it, what you're given is a very practical insight into how these beliefs show up, not just in the everyday lives of Muslims, but specifically in our classrooms with students and families, and the different phenomenon that results in that context because of it. What gets shown from this is number one, very practical ways of how to avoid giving offense or to avoid unknowingly prompting Muslim students to do things in school that go against the religious beliefs of them and their family. And this is something that unfortunately occurs all the time in our schools. It is the vast majority of the time done unwittingly by educators who simply don't have the background knowledge themselves to know what they're doing. But when you take this training, you'll understand how this happens all the time and how it's something that Muslim students and their families stay silent about because of the social stigma associated with the religion, and because there has yet to be a practical and comprehensive educator training program that is needed to review these things to educators in a sensitive way and in a constructive way. And this is just one of the voids in our educational discourse in the field of public education that engaging Muslim students in public schools is filling for the educators who take it. But getting beyond just how to avoid giving offense, this part also shows how student and family background can actually be leveraged to enhance engagement of students and how we can utilize students' home cultural banks to fulfill the shared secular objectives that public education institutes and Muslim communities have for young people. So how do you draw on the teachings that take place in the home culture and community of Muslim students to teach students how to be kind, to teach them self-respect and respect for others, to teach them self-discipline and productive maturation, and to teach them how to value knowledge and learning and persistence? We may not think about it or realize it, but this is an advantage that students of a Christian cultural background have when they come into the classroom that Muslim students and students of other minority religions do not have. To give an example of that, a common rule in schools that students are told is to treat others as you want to be treated. This is commonly referred to as the golden rule in the Western world. It exists as an overarching rule in many schools, or a baseline rule that gets put on posters and put around the school. And the company Scholastic, which over the past century has partnered with the public education system, perhaps more so than any other private company. Scholastic actually recommends this to be a baseline rule in all schools that schools teach the students and that they follow. Well, where does this rule come from? It comes from the New Testament and from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount in the New Testament, specifically how the language of the way it's articulated is constructed. Now, we don't articulate it as coming from there in schools. We articulate it in a purely secular fashion. But a student who has a Christian cultural background, they are more likely to have had this specific lesson with similar language taught to them from a young age in their home. So when they are taught that lesson in school and the values behind it, they are more primed to have it resonate with them and to have a feel for what that value means and to have a feel and a know-how for what the expectations are and how that lesson is supposed to be implemented in a different context. So what are we doing? And how are we working to develop secular language that reinforces these values that we want all students to have, but that correlate better to the cultural and religious teachings of Muslim students? Where in education is anyone even talking about this, despite how clearly important it is for us to tackle? This is one of the great benefits of this training because I give much of those teachings the specific language that I use with students and that I know to be effective with Muslim students from my own practice and my own background experience with them. This part also gives teachers the knowledge they need to begin reflecting themselves on how to do this better in their own practice and how to do it with intentionality. This part of the training is very rich, and there's also quite a bit of discussion on curriculum and things that are commonly taught in our K through 12 curriculum and considerations that need to be understood for how those teachings resonate with Muslim students and families. And again, showing and demonstrating how we can turn potential areas of clash into areas of utilization to enhance engagement and academic achievement in our students. Now, part 3 is about the internal experience of Islam and how it interplays in someone's lives and their religious beliefs. Part 4 gets more into the external practice on what I call the technicalities of following Islam. Because Islam, you may or may not know, it is a very, very legalistic religion, and it is a religion that is very, very thorough in its legal rulings and real-world external application. It affects every single area of a person's life. And again, there is much detail that educators need to know and generally do not know in order to be able to avoid giving offense, as well as to be able to properly accommodate and support students and families when they wish to assert the rights that they have to religious practice in the schools. These types of accommodations are something that schools struggle with a lot. And they're something that students and families struggle with even more, but they stay silent about it for the vast majority of people. However, for schools, being able to effectively accommodate religious practice and sensitivities, it has an essential role in increasing engagement and satisfaction of students and families in the school environment overall. And again, being able to be an effective enough educator and nurturer of these young people to honestly put them on a path towards self-actualization in their lives growing up in the Western world. So part 3 deals with the more internal dimensions, whereas part 4 deals with the more external dimensions. In every area of life, the religion of Islam has rules over what a Muslim does and how they conduct themselves in their external actions. Meaning what their schedules are like, when they pray, how they pray, where you pray and don't pray, when one wakes up and goes to bed, when one eats, how one eats, what one does not eat, how someone dresses, what they wear, what they do not wear, how they go to the bathroom and clean themselves, and also as well how they relate both interpersonally and spatially to different types of people of different types of relations. There are rules about all of these things in Islam, and they are an ever constant thing in a person's life. And for Muslim families, oftentimes, most of the time, in Muslim culture, a family's sensitivity is shaped around these things or based on them. And for a Muslim child, learning about these things and navigating these things is a lifelong process. And it's difficult when you're constantly in environments and around people who are wholly unaware of them and do not know them in detail. And again, when educators don't know about these things, the message that is implicitly given to those students and the expectation that is implicitly given to those students and families is that you just got to live like everybody else does. And the real thing that gets internalized for many Muslim young people from that is that who I am doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter, and to get by in life, what I have to do is just capitulate my own self to everyone else's sense of comfort. And in large part, this dynamic is something that students and families and communities have given into for a very, very long time in the society. And having done that, it has really led to a fair amount of psychological detriment of people in Muslim communities because of this capitulation that has gone on beneath the surface for so long. So some layers of that type of damage and hurt, it reveals itself to educators when they take this training, and as well as the role that educators themselves have often played in doing that, and again, unintentionally, but a role nevertheless. So sometimes when educators take this training and they get through parts 3 and 4, sometimes they feel bad. They feel bad about certain things, but again, the good news is the training also shows the path towards rectification and how to avoid the common clashes that take place and how we can anticipate those things proactively and how we can collaborate and use this newfound knowledge that the training gives to provide accommodations and sensitivity effectively. So there is a general dynamic that plays out constantly in our schools that the training meets out for educators in many detailed ways, where a lack of background knowledge on the part of the educator causes offense to be given to Muslim students and families. Due to social stigma, Muslims and students and families will stay silent about those things and suppress their own self-concept and capitulate as a coping mechanism. The training reveals these things in very practical ways, but also shows how to turn these dynamics into resources to enhance engagement. It shows that it shows how this happens in internal ways in part 3, how it happens in external ways in part 4. But what about our pedagogical choices in school? Because the same dynamic exists in this vein as well. And perhaps for us as educators, this is the most important thing for us to understand about our Muslim students, that they come to school with an oftentimes very rich cultural background of both formal and informal learning. A background of learning that shapes within them some rather predictable habits as learners and a distinct type of preparedness as a learner when they arrive in the classroom. Now, this preparedness that they have from their own cultural learning, it's something that the pedagogical choices that we make in school, they can either clash against this preparedness or they can draw on it as a resource to be built upon. And again, because of the lack of background knowledge that educators generally have and the lack of insight into these cultural contexts that our Muslim students exist in, too often what is taking place is a clash that results in disengagement of students and a downward spiral of academic engagement and behavior. So part 5 focuses on learning structures and mosques in particular and examines mosques in an internal way as learning environments. Now, teachers absolutely love this part of the training. It's a part where the online course is very beneficial. It's recognized by academics in the field of education that learning in mosques is one of the most commonly occurring educational environments in the entire world, but it is also one of the least examined within the field of research, and especially within Western academia. So, and researchers, they also acknowledge that this lack of examination that has taken place within academia, it is primarily due to a lack of access on the part of researchers themselves and the researchers' own lack of ability to be granted access into these places in order to do the proper analyzing and examination. Now, for me, this is not an issue because I have my own life history of learning, organizing, coordinating, and teaching in these environments, both before and after becoming a teacher myself, and both during and after my own training as a teacher. During that time and after, what I've done is I've examined these environments And I've broken them down through a pedagogical lens while doing the same with my Muslim students in public schools, as well as consulting with numerous people in public education, as well as mosques and Muslim young people and young adults who've grown up in environments where they have been what educators call double schooled, meaning learning one way in a public school environment and learning another way in another environment. So you may or may not know that many, and I would say the majority of our Muslim students in the Western world, while they spend Monday through Friday in the public schools, they will also very commonly spend long hours on Saturday or long hours on Sunday, or sometimes on both days, and sometimes also in the evening hours on the weekdays. They will spend time in mosques undergoing different forms of formal learning, and oftentimes they're exposed to these environments before they even go to the public school at all. And it's not atypical that our Muslim students are sometimes much better behaved and more engaged in those environments than they are in the Monday through Friday schools. I don't know that schools can authentically want to talk about being culturally relevant with students and have Muslim students in their school, yet be completely unaware as to what learning is like in these environments which shape student habits of mind and student habits of learning. And it is well documented and examined in education research that home cultural, formal and informal modes of learning, they form the basis for a student's engagement in formal learning in public schools. So how can we not draw on what goes on in these environments and be aware of them as public school educators, especially when there is such a strong focus nowadays on being culturally relevant in our engagement with students? So in part 5 of this training, you get a categorical and systematic understanding of the different modes of learnings in mosques, the different types of learner tendencies that they inculcate, and you get insight into how much of what we do in public schools can clash against these habits of mind and habits of learning that are shaped in this cultural environment. And you get more insight into the code switching that students have to do in this vein. But the great benefit is I also demonstrate the types of pedagogical choices and strategies that draw on these habits of learning and mind as a resource, and that instead of looking at them from a deficit mindset perspective, I instead demonstrate how to build upon them and to get students where we want to in meeting academic standards that we have for them across subject areas by building on the learner habits that these places inculcate as a foundation, as a resource, as opposed to rubbing and clashing against them. Any school who misses this and misses this part of this training, they're going to be behind in their ability to engage students, and that it is also Muslim students in particular, and it's an area that I will be expanding upon further in the future. And the discourse in this part is on both instructional methods as well as behavior management methods and some of the psychological implications that are had for our students when they undergo this double schooling phenomenon where they're being schooled in different ways in different places. And again, this part, it's just something that is greatly appreciated by the educators who take this training. And I think you can see here how this training is constantly offering insights and constantly demonstrating where pitfalls in what we're trying to do occur with Muslim students frequently in the choices that educators make when they don't understand where Muslim students are coming from. But again, the training, it also gives the tools of working towards a solution and towards being a part of the problem-solving process and being a part of enhancing our academic engagement with students as opposed to just floating by day in the classroom. So part 6, the final part may be the most beautiful part because it gets into things that we can do in the curriculum, and it gets into specific books and resources that we can use in the curriculum to authentically honor our Muslim students' background, and again, to enrich academic engagement in a way that draws on our students' background knowledge, on the cultural background knowledge that they bring into the school, as opposed to clashing against it. And the beautiful part of this is the training is designed so that everything that the educator has learned up till now in the training, in parts 2 through 5, that operates as knowledge for the educator to have that supports their own ability in using these books and resources that are offered in Part 6. Because educators can always find books that have Muslim people in them, or at least Muslim-looking people. But if educators don't have the necessary background knowledge themselves, they can't actually utilize those books for any type of advanced engagement. And to set students up for success in interacting with them and in performing higher level academic tasks with them that draws on their background knowledge. And what happens too often when educators don't have the appropriate background knowledge themselves is that when we seek out culturally relevant text to use in the classroom, it's only done in a superficial way. And that causes mistakes to be made that sabotage our goals with students. But people, they don't realize it because of their own lack of background knowledge. So Part 6 not only gives specific texts that can be used throughout the K-12 curriculum to engage Muslim students in rich academic work, but it also gives a categorical understanding of the different ways that books featuring Muslims should be analyzed and understood. Because the reality is, there's actually a whole long history of portrayals of Muslim people in Western art and literature. And these portrayals, they follow certain patterns, both historically and still today, and these patterns need to be understood. And when educators, when they don't understand the religious background in particular, and how it interplays in the everyday, real-world lives of Muslim people, then they can't understand and detect these patterns, and they can't treat them properly in the classroom when these texts get brought in. And then, as takes place again and again, teachers end up falling short and falling into unintended mistakes when they attempt to be culturally relevant in the classroom, but they're only following the guidance of different paradigms from different sources of teacher training that do not actually analyze Muslim students and families as Muslims and focus on understanding them. So if you read through the testimonials of this training, it will be clear to you how real-world educators find this training to be needed, they find it to be insightful, inspirational, and energizing to their work. Teachers and educators desperately want solutions, and they desperately want to work towards the goals that they have for their students in an authentic way. Too often, educators and teachers feel stuck, or too often they feel that the challenges of teaching a diverse population leaves them feeling that the relationships that they build with students and families and their attempts to engage students are not authentic, or they're only transactional. There are real challenges in teaching a diverse population of students. And there are real challenges in the demographic changes that have gone on in the United States. And no one works through those challenges in a more real-world way than educators in public schools. But the good news is that solutions towards our highest ambitions with students do exist. And through learning, proper and serious learning, we can achieve the results that we want to with students. So I thank you for watching this. And if you are considering the training, and if you are watching this in the spring of 2021, just know that the training is discounted when you register through Eventbrite through June 5th. The link is in the description box. This training, it's needed nationally. It's very needed nationally. And I have an obligation to make it available and to make it known about to educators throughout the country and even internationally to some degree. So if you're watching this in spring of 2021, you found out about this program at a time where I'm just on the cusp of reaching out beyond a few localities where I've done the training before for a few years now and where I've received such positive feedback from. Now, in order for me to make the training available and to make it more known to educators throughout the country, the reality is that I have to do some investing and marketing of the program, and I am confronted with a reality that means I have to increase the price of the program from what I've normally charged. Funding for this program is not it's not buttressed by any sort of educational foundation. It's not buttressed by any sort of grant from the Department of Education or nonprofits or anything like this. Me personally, I've actually had those things offered to me, but I don't believe in, I don't, for various reasons, I don't believe in doing that and doing that and going about the program that way. So the reality that I'm faced with right now is reaching out means I have to increase the price in the near future. So the price that it's available at before June 5th by registering through Eventbrite. I just like people who are watching this in spring of 2021 just to understand that it won't be available at that price again. It's really a one-time opportunity. So it would be it's a really good program to do over the summer. People appreciate that, but you just might want to consider taking the advantage of the opportunity that exists right now to get that discount pricing before June 5th. The book is available on Amazon. The book is intended to be a complement to the course. This program is originally a training. The book is a very dense read because my intention with that was to go in depth with the research that is behind the statements and assertions that are made in the training. So people who want the depth of research, they can go to the book and get it as a complement to the course. But the book, just understand, is not designed to be an easy read in that respect. The online course is the route to go as far as ease of consumption for the training material. And also, if you're watching this, there's a fair chance that you've already received a reach out email to me. You can email me with questions about the program at any time. If you register for the online course, then you become a bona fide colleague of mine, and opportunities will open up for you to further consult with me and further engage with this material and the issues that the training goes into. If you've not received an email from me before, or you lost what my email address is, you can always go to abrahameducation.com. There's a contact form on the homepage. You just scroll down and you can contact me through that with any inquiry that you like. So thank you again for taking the time to watch this video. If you got to the end of it, I look forward to engaging with you in the future, and peace be with you.